Hi, Jeff. Hi, Lee. So we couldn't finish our types
Hey, folks.
conversation last time. So we're just going to continue on to complete our discussion on the Enneagram as one of the main typologies that we all like. Not to say that that's the best typology by any means, but it's something we often like to have fun with, especially in the interval community. So last time we ended with type 4, and today we start with the thinking head triad, and we go to type 5, known as the investigator, and we have an investigator in our little triad here today, Jeff. So especially from you, we'd love to hear your experience of being a 5. To begin with, Lee, maybe you can read, if you have, the little short
descriptions. Absolutely. Type 1 we described as a person of strong moral principles who is likely to be disciplined, reliable, and precise. We described type 2 as a loving people person who is likely to be caring, social, and helpful. We described type 3 as an ambitious achiever who is likely to be energetic, adaptive, and driven. We described type 4 as a passionate individualist who is likely to be imaginative, sensitive, and creative. We described type 5 as a seeker of knowledge who is likely to be curious, insightful, and good at logical reasoning. We discussed type 6 as a seeker of safety and security who is likely to be attentive, cooperative, and trustworthy. We described type 7 as an enthusiastic pleasure seeker who is likely to be spontaneous, lively, and optimistic. We described type 8 as an assertive influencer who is likely to be decisive, persistent, and an effective leader. And we described type 9 as a seeker of harmony who is likely to be peaceful, agreeable, and kind. And so now we're moving to Jeff, who is, of course, a self-identified type 5, and to read the type 5 description. Again, type 5 is a seeker of knowledge who is likely to be curious, insightful, and good at logical reasoning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I think that's true. I think as a 5, first of all, I'm a seeker of knowledge. I mean, I just have always been intensely curious about everything. And mostly as an observer, more than as a participant, especially as I grew. As a child, I was, in the game, and, we all were, but I eventually sort of grew into my observer position, which is, a wonderful home of the 5, where we can be, watching our own movie of the world in a way. And what could be a problem about that is that other people are an intrusion on that. It's like when somebody walks in the room, all of a sudden they're wanting to play their movie on my screen. And I was perfectly happy here with my own movie and my own thing. And I didn't necessarily want that. And so that's sort of the tension with a 5. And 5s are often, described as introverted. We actually prefer to think our feelings, if you want to know the truth. We prefer to think about anything rather than actually do it. And this can turn into the downside, where 5s become kind of alienated sometimes because they're willing to entertain anything in their mind. They can become cynical. They can go into dark places. The pathological 5s are sort of the sinister mastermind who's plotting to blow up the earth, that kind of thing. That could be the downside of the 5. When a 5 disintegrates, or a 5 under stress, or if they're not being their best, what would we say, an undeveloped 5 or a less mature 5 will have qualities of a disintegrated 7. So 7s are always, what's next? What's out there? What can I do? And so 5s become that way in their mind. So we're just pecking at the remote control or the internet or whatever. And all of these types, and I guess I want to pause here and remind people, you can feel into that at any type, right? The times we just sort of get fractured and our attention. Fives, we love that. We could spend hours doing that. And it's all kind of adding up in a way. We're categorizing, we're finding patterns. It's not gone to waste with a five. So we have these big structures of ideas that we've cobbled together. And this is why, a lot of integralists are fives. I would say that fives may be overrepresented in the integral world because integral provides such a new world. I want to say playground, but it's everything. Where we can look at things far more clearly and see far more things, and nothing's left out. Everything's included. And my God, I experienced finding integral. It's like Ken Wilber says, it was psychoactive for me. It was more than that. It was body active. It was subtle body active. And it was thrilling. And so I think that's, the fives get an extra flavor of that. So yeah, a five, when they're on the mature side of things, and we kind of bounce around, but we have, as we develop, we get more mature and stably mature. A five moves into an eight, and an eight is somebody who is assertive and a leader, and who knows where he or she wants to take things, and can be a real benefit to the community. And that's a five that is integrated enough to want to and be able to not just observe, but get in the game and help move this thing along, this life, this world. And so we like mature fives, and that, and I love the Enneagram for that, because as I work on my own development and see where I am and what I'm doing, I know when I'm at my best, I'm an eight. I'm out there doing it. And when I get, tired and I fall apart, then I'm on the couch with 3 remotes and the internet and my phone. And, so here we are. This is the world of the five, as best I can transmit it at this moment.
That's really delicious somehow. Yeah, and just to recap a little bit from something that I mentioned about type 4 on our previous call, if you look at the Enneagram diagram, you can see that there is a sort of an empty space between 5 and type 4 and type 5. And so these two types are the types that most often go down to kind of the depths of, they're happy to investigate deeply places like emptiness even, or just, spiritual things. There is a comfortableness in a comfort with what many others might feel uncomfortable somehow, going deep into those spaces. I'd like to just simply read a little bit from the Enneagram Institute website, what they offer. The type 5, known, kind of captured as the investigator, is the intense cerebral type, perceptive, innovative, secretive, and isolated. Briefly, 5s are alert, insightful, and curious. They're able to concentrate and focus on developing complex ideas and skills. Independent, innovative, and inventive, they can also become preoccupied with their thoughts and imaginary constructs. They become detached, yet high-strung and intense. They typically have problems with eccentricity, nihilism, and isolation. At their best, visionary pioneers, often ahead of their time and able to see the world in an entirely new way. Their basic fear is being useless, helpless, or incapable. And some of the famous 5s that this website offers include the Buddha and Albert Einstein, Oliver Sacks, John Nash, who is the character that you'll find in the movie A Beautiful Mind, Just so much. I love that movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies, actually. Stephen Hawking's, Salvador Dali is really interesting to me as coming from an artist standpoint. You often think of, think of Enneagram 4 as the artist, but the truth is there are artists of every type. And the type 5 heady type of art is always fascinating to me.
Yeah, Namali, I remember when I first saw Dali, maybe age 10.
Mm-hmm.
Again, literally bodily thrilled. The first serious artist I ever noticed or magnetized to.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So about types, sometimes when people wonder about what my type might be, it's actually really interesting to go back into our childhood and kind of recall what things sparked a lot of joy in us, or what things attracted us, or even what things like brought a lot of fear in us as kids. And
Yeah.
usually that has a lot of information about our Enneagram type.
For me, it was a new book. Oh my God.
Yeah. A couple more here. Eckhart Tolle, you can totally see that. And a lot of us from the Integral community would put Ken Wilber in the Integral 5 category as well. Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg. You can imagine how Mark Zuckerberg and the Bill Gates types just don't want much to do with the rest of the world, perhaps. And to create that, but that doesn't mean that a 5 doesn't want community and connection. But they found a way to create just staying at home, and I can open my screen and I can travel infinitely through the internet. So like things like Facebook and a lot of web tech folks come from this world as well.
A lot of internet trolls are
Yeah.
5s.
Yes. Julian
spreading their nihilism
exactly.
on the comments section.
Yes, exactly. Then there's Julian Assange, Alfred Hitchcock, Marlene Dietrich, Stanley Kubrick. Yeah, it's so interesting. Jodie Foster. So there's a couple of 5s that I think we can, a lot of like philosopher types, Nietzsche, Agatha Christie, Stephen King, writers, Emily Dickinson. So yeah, so 5s are just, I always think of having a meeting, and you want a 5 in the meeting because they're the ones who will be willing to find all the necessary information. They'll do their research. They'll make sure to cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and they're very diligent in that way. And then the other types may at times want to pull them out of their mental absorption and engage other people, perhaps community, listen to others, and bring a little awareness to a 5 from an emotional standpoint and their physical well-being as well. Often, sometimes they would say things about certain spiritual teachers like Ramana Maharishi, who might have been a 5, utterly disconnected with the body in some ways. So anyway, so that's a little bit of 5. Is there anything that Lee you might like to add as well?
I think you've both covered it very extensively. I would add that you hinted to it already, but that one of the dangers of type 5's ability to travel through their own sort of mental space is that indeed sometimes they can perceive connections within their internal space that are not present within the external world, and that can lead to conspiratorial thinking or to unhealthy sort of ideas such as nihilism indeed. And the 5s that I know are typically very good at reasoning, and they can reason for different positions at different times. So the 5s that I know have sort of argued for one thing, but then a week later, for instance, argued against that same thing with equally impressive and persuasive logic. So, so that's also something that came up for me Jeff, when you said on the Daily Evolve, and we've discussed this already, is that you said, well, I tend to agree with the last person I've spoken to. And I think that also might be a sort of type 5 trait, is that because you sort of try on the ideas of the people you're interacting with, that you then tend to wear the coat, so to speak, of the last person you've sort of shared ideas with, and then move to the next interaction. So
Yeah.
it's really
I think that's
interesting
right,
to
yeah.
see you. It was really interesting to see you in action when we were just before the call speaking about Sri Lanka, where Nomali is originally from, and that you immediately sort of asked a number of curious historical questions, which I think your curiosity was sort of just came out all
I
by
had
itself.
to know.
That's the primary thing, right? That's like
Yeah.
that statement captures a 5. I have to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm not going to feel safe or complete.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And safety is big
Yeah.
for 5s. This 5, 6, and 7 often has an underbelly of fear that is driving a lot of their actions. And to mitigate that for a 5 is to be as well prepared as possible with all the information that I think I may need.
Yeah.
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 I just
And I should also, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead. It's okay.
I was going to say, type 5s are also typically really good at conveying information that they've absorbed, because they can absorb it in such detail. So at the same time in the depth, but also in the breadth of knowledge. So for instance, some of the type 5 friends I have, they're able to explain particular aspects of quantum mechanics or of a relativity theory or things like that, that are very difficult to comprehend unless you're well versed in the material. And at least many of the 5s that I know tend to be that, because they're so interested in how the world works that they go to the nuts and bolts and really sort of absorb it, so that afterwards they can also communicate it to people who are not as well versed in that material.
Yeah. It's what we bring to the party, you know.
Yes.
And just on this line, there's a one downside for any 5s that are listening, and I think this is one of the pivot points between being a 5 that's actually moving into a more functional 8 and actually working in the world. Is a big problem for 5s is completion. Actually saying, this is done, this is ready, I need to move on, because there's always more to know. There's always, it's like, oh my God, I can't put this out there because I haven't checked out XYZ. But so moving in sort of an imperfection that your 5-ness doesn't really like is, I think, important to moving into that 8 space.
So type 6, maybe Lee, you could begin with the...
Certainly.
Yeah.
So we describe type 6 as a seeker of safety and security who is likely to be attentive, cooperative, and trustworthy.
Mm-hmm. And according to this website, Enneagram Institute, they are the loyalist, is what the word that is commonly used. Committed, security-oriented type, engaging, responsible, anxious, and suspicious. The committed, security-oriented type. 6 are reliable, hardworking, responsible, and trustworthy. Excellent troubleshooters. They foresee problems and foster cooperation, but can also become defensive, evasive, and anxious, running on stress while complaining about it. They can be cautious and indecisive, but also reactive, defiant, and rebellious. They typically have problems with self-doubt and suspicion. At their best, they're internally stable and self-reliant, courageously championing themselves and others. And then their basic fear is of being without support and guidance. Some of the famous examples are Krishnamurti, some of us know from spiritual circles, Sigmund Freud, J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, Robert Kennedy, Malcolm X, Prince Harry, Mike Tyson, Bruce Springsteen. I've heard that a lot of comedians are type 6s, that they use humor to cope their fear, cope with their anxiety. So you would see, there's also Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, Diane Keaton, Mel Gibson, Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Aniston, Sarah Jessica Parker, Ben Affleck, David Letterman, Jay Leno, Ellen DeGeneres, Andy Rooney, Newt Gingrich, Alex Jones, Rush Limbaugh, Chris Rock, Louis Black, Larry David, Seinfeld's George Costanza, and Frodo of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. And you can feel that sort of sixness that, you know, is characteristic of all of those people in one way or the other. And it is I find sixes to be, my favorite description of a six for sort of a back pocket is the person you want to have on your team. Mm-hmm. They're solid citizens. If you think of the party of 9 people, the sixes are the ones making sure that nobody's getting too far out of line here. They're not, you know, curb your enthusiasm. Larry David and George Costanza, which are basically the same person, is perfect. And curb your enthusiasm is what sixes will do. Yeah. Because they don't want things getting out of control because, well, you looked at this and this and so they're critical, they're anxious, they're contracted around what might go wrong. But can we overvalue that? I mean, could we undervalue that when we think about the world as it is? You know, and especially, you know, in tribal societies, you needed somebody who is sort of pulling that together, keeping the group together. And so I love that about the six. And then also this sort of weird characteristic of the six, and I think they have it here, is that they're rebellious and defiant at the same time. And so, you know, a six will want to keep everybody in line, but they will also resist getting any kind of ideology laid on them or any kind of force. And in a way that's really good for the group, because it's a different way of looking out for the group. And sixes are often described as counterphobic, or at least that's a flavor of sixness, which means that when they're afraid, they go towards the danger. And so they, you know, will be the one to volunteer. But, you know, they're doing this service where they're taking care of the group, and that's their thing. You know, when I think of one of my very favorite sixes, my Chuck, my man, he's a six through and through, and he's self-aware. He goes into, you know, sort of, what's a disintegrated six looks, where's that go?
They disintegrate to 3.
To 3.
Yeah, so the unhealthy aspect.
Yeah. So, a little puffed up, and, you know, and I think there's some truth to that. It may be, you know, I don't think Chuck has a lot of that, but what he does have is a mature six where he is, you know, again, that guy not only the guy you want on your team, but maybe the captain of the team, because he really loves everybody. And he's a champion for he's got kids and grandkids, and he's such a champion for those kids in a good way, not just you know, not just parentally, but in a bigger way. And he's involved in local politics and the Boulder Association, and he wants to make sure Boulder, you know, and he doesn't want to have these big ideologies, and he just wants to keep things safe and good. And when I think of Chuck, I want to say he's a good person. And sixes are, at their best, they're good people. And you want to flower that up. But the truth is, just being a good person is really important for the group to have one of them. And so that's my paean to the sixes.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we'll have to make sure that Chuck hears that.
Yeah.
Love Chuck too. Yes, yes, absolutely. I've heard, and sort of know this also from some of my six friends. They're the ones you want if you're going on a trip, because they'll think of like, okay, like, have you got the extra pair of socks that you might need and the flashlight? And they're always thinking ahead and preparing for that. The underbelly of that is that they can also get stuck in that out of a place of fear. And so they're always wondering about what could potentially go wrong. And I think something that's really fascinating to witness in a six that I've noticed is this relationship to authority. They're actually so loyal. They're actually so beautifully looking for something to be loyal to. And they're the friends that you can trust the most, it feels like. But then if that loyalty is ever hurt or they begin to doubt, boy, can they doubt. And then they really push against anything that looks like authority or something that is claiming to have the answers. He or she or they will just really struggle with that. It's like, I'm not going to buy into that. Sometimes I think of just the sort of very generally speaking here, but libertarianism feels a bit sort of six-ish in certain ways. It's like, I'll do my thing. You do your thing. We'll be fine in that way. We don't have to have this big like governing person looking over all of us. It's a lot of like, just leave me to myself and I'll be good. But at the same time, there's also an incredible value for connection and finding ways to create community, which is also a thing that libertarians often do. And in that struggle can be quite misunderstood or hard to understand, that tension between authority and I want to be loyal to that, and also no, don't bring that to me. So yeah, what about you? What's your experience with sixes, Lee?
Well, so one of the first things I was thinking about is, of course, Jeff, you often have Keith Witt, psychotherapist, on the Daily Evolver. And one of the stories that Keith has told in the past is that he was at a young age when he realized that in his bed, if a bear were to come into the house, it could maul him and the family. And in other words, there was a sort of a realization that the physical body is extremely vulnerable, and that everything about being a human being is susceptible to change, and that we can easily find that our life is ended very quickly by things that we hadn't foreseen. So there's a very clear logic to the orientation of sixes when you realize that basically life is finite and you can extend it if you sort of are prepared, and if you sort of make sure that you avoid danger and things like that. So there's a sort of a logic to the phobic side of the six, as you were describing, but there's also indeed the counterphobic side, where there's a sort of a fear of engaging something and then indeed moving towards that. So for instance, people who do the extreme sports like dive off cliffs in wingsuits and things like that, which apparently has a ridiculously high number of fatalities. So I could imagine that being something that a six might enjoy. And in my own network, I have a number of sixes whom I'm friends with, and one of them sort of always took the lead when we were students, and he would sort of organize things. And then one time we were walking at night through a forest with a number of us, and we were sort of just on a trek through the forest, and we ran into a group of people who were camping in the forest in military equipment, and they were sort of reserve military personnel. And my friend, the six, he hadn't foreseen that that was going to happen, and they saw us before he saw them, which gave him a sort of a very existential fright that he hadn't protected us and that he hadn't been a good leader. So after that, he basically felt very ambiguous about organizing things again, and it really took a couple of months before he was sort of before he'd restored his faith in himself to be indeed the leader that he is. So so that came up for me. And another thing within the realm of six is that if we look at the historical most destructive people who have been identified as sixes, the most destructive probably would be Adolf Hitler, who is often seen to be a six. And it's very interesting if you look at his ascendancy, the way that he was very vocal about how he derived his power from the group. So basically he would sort of sense what the group wanted him to talk about and what they wanted him to sort of represent, and he would model himself after that. So if you speak about the six sort of degenerating to the three, so presenting an image and sort of trying to be something to please and to gain influence, I think that might be a good example of how that can go extremely wrong. So,
yeah.
And
he also chose to kill himself than be captured.
True.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
True. So that would be my reflection on the six, both the greatness, of course, of people who are willing to sort of sacrifice themselves, or at least to indeed be there for the group and be loyal to the group, and of course the other end of the destructive impulses.
Yeah.
The range of human behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I always, just to end on a slightly happier note about sixes, rather than Hitler, I always feel like sixes are doing the same thing that twos do. Their ultimate drive is to help somehow. They're ever willing to wait around for you and, you know, ask you, what do you need? Can I get that for you? They do it very differently than twos would. But I think at the core, there's something that is such a deeply sincere helper, is wanting so much to make sure that you're okay. I'm okay, this is good. And so everyone else can relax when there is a good, healthy six in the group. I get to just like drop my concerns because I can fully trust that my dear six beloved has already taken care of it, or is already making the necessary phone calls. It's just a beauty to that. I was in Frisco recently with my New York friends, who I think I talked to you about, Jeffrey, from FIT and such. And there's one of them, Ryan, who every time I meet him, I see how he is asking, if we're leaving the hotel room, does everybody have an extra key if you need to get in? And he noticed that I had ankle socks in Frisco and I wasn't wearing like good boots. And he just noticed that out of nowhere. And he asked me, do you have a better pair of socks maybe? Like there's about, 8 inches of snow right outside the door and about 14 inches of snow as we keep walking. Do you have a good jacket? There's just such an intuitive way that they are looking, their tentacles just go towards safety. Is everybody protected and safe here? Mm-hmm. So I just love that. I just feel just this warmth feeling of love towards that sense of protection they bring. So good. And then our final type 7.
Type 7. So we describe type 7 as an enthusiastic pleasure seeker who is likely to be spontaneous, lively, and optimistic.
Yeah. There are a couple of 7s, I think. Yeah, I think we definitely know a couple of sevens from our integral community, certainly. But okay, let me read a little bit about the Enneagram type from the Enneagram Institute site. They're known as the enthusiast, the busy, variety-seeking type, spontaneous, versatile, acquisitive, and scattered. Sevens are extroverted, optimistic, versatile, and spontaneous. Playful, high spirited, and practical, they can also misapply their many talents, becoming overextended, scattered, and undisciplined. They constantly seek new and exciting experiences, but can become distracted and exhausted by staying on the go. They typically have problems with impatience and impulsiveness. At their best, they focus their talents on worthwhile goals, becoming appreciative, joyous, and satisfied. And their basic fear is of being deprived and in pain. Some of the sevens that are identified here include the 14th Dalai Lama, which I can even just say Dalai Lama and just feel his positive energy, you know. Galileo, Mozart, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, Amelia Earhart, Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, John F. Kennedy, Joe Biden, Sarah Palin, Richard Branson, Ted Turner, Susie Orman, I think that's the financial advisor, Sacha Baron Cohen, who I love, Mick Jagger, Miley Cyrus, Britney Spears, Katy Perry, Steven Spielberg, Fred Astaire, Jim Carrey, Bruce Willis, Robert Downey Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio. I wouldn't have thought of him as a seven. Charlie Sheen, Paris Hilton, Larry King, Howard Stern, Simon Cowell. So there you go. I would think Simon Cowell was an 8.
And I would think Howard Stern was a 5, and I know Howard Stern pretty well. So, you know, we all have our opinion.
And we could just briefly talk about the wings here, which we haven't talked. So whatever is your Enneagram type, then that type extends. You could see like who's on either side of me, and I have more access and expression from one of those types. So Howard Stern could be a 6 with the 5 wing, perhaps, or a 5 with a 6 wing.
Right. Yeah, that would be what I would say. But at any rate, I'm on board with most of those people. And, you know, as a 5 myself, I love my 7s. And I often think, you know, if I find myself at some sort of a cocktail party or some sort of a gathering, and I don't know what to do with myself, and I want to go so bad, and I wish a trap door would open, I'm so happy when a 7 walks in. I'm so happy to see them because they're fun. You know, they're the life of the party if they want to be, and they smile and they bring their energy, and I can sort of just latch into that, and I'm good for a while. And 5s love 7s because 7s will tell you everything you want to know. You know, and if that's what that's our specialty, is we want to know. And they love talking, and they love other people, and they love getting things going. And I think at the downside, they have a lot. My 7 friend is actually, it's funny because we're now in this COVID quarantine, and he suffers a lot from FOMO, the fear of missing out. And that's 7s. But he says, I found my FOMO is relaxed because nobody can do anything. So I'm not really missing out. It's not like other people are having fun without me, because that's intolerable to a 7. You know, that there should be fun going on and I'm not there and having part of it. So, you know, that's what I love about 7s. And I think, so where's the 7 disintegrate to, Namali? Or what's the 7 under stress?
7 under stress goes to 1.
Okay.
The underbelly of the 1, which means that they can become a little righteous and a little arrogant, perhaps.
Yeah, and persnickety.
Yeah, maybe Lee can speak to the underbelly of the one, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, well, I think where one of the ways I think about the sevens is that I know many sevens, and I ran into one yesterday, and coincidentally, a friend of mine, and he was really suffering because of this whole lockdown thing. I mean, we can go out in the Netherlands to exercise, but he's somebody who sort of needs stimulus. So he needs a stimulus to sort of take action. So because I play squash with him regularly, and then he sort of loves it, and he doesn't want to stop when we're playing. And I'm always the one who says, okay, this has been enough. And then he'll always say, oh, can't we go another game? And then I'll say, no, because typically I'll be sort of exhausted. And then afterwards he'll sort of report that he has pain in his joints, and he's sort of, that we basically went too far. So in the moment of sort of enjoying, there's a sort of greed that comes up for the seven. And indeed, that's why it says acquisitive, because the seven wants to accumulate as many positive experiences as possible in the moment, and also be planning for how to acquire positive experiences in the future. So now my friend who I ran into yesterday, he has to sort of generate his own motivation to sort of get past the inertia and then experience the fun of having exercised. But so he hasn't done it. He can't push through the negativity and the sort of difficulty of first experiencing the not fun of the toughness of sort of motivating yourself and getting things, getting the exercise done, even though he knows that he craves the outcome of sort of sitting down and feeling that you've exercised and having that high. So ironically, what can happen for sevens is that if they're too focused on only experiencing pleasure, is that they can turn their lives into sort of a superficial consumption of pleasure, and that basically their entire life can sort of degenerate into something that's not fun anymore. And often sevens will have to go through a period in life where they learn how to focus themselves, and they learn how to choose one thing and to really engage with that, instead of indeed what Jeff was speaking about, the remote control sort of trying to consume everything at once and then really sort of checking out in a certain sense. And if they do that, and I've had a couple of friends who were sort of aimless until they both started managing a hotel, and what they did was they were able to generate experiences for people. And as Jeff says, if they're at their best, they can generate so much fun for everyone else. So that's what they did in their hotel. And my friend, he would play music for them, and my other friend, she would design the rooms, the hotel rooms, in a very beautiful way. And basically, they were able to do that for a number of years, and then sell the hotel for quite a profit. And then they spent the next 2 years traveling and enjoying life the way they wanted to. So, and normally what you asked about sort of the disintegration to one, for the sevens, what I've experienced is that sevens can become very cruel if they feel an unpleasant mood and they're not able to manage it skillfully. Then they can sort of lash out in ways that unhealthy ones can also do, or they can become sort of critical in ways that are not constructive. So those are all aspects, of course, of unhealthy ones.
Yeah.
Where do they integrate to, Namali?
They integrate to 5. They become focused. Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of like jumping from one thing to another,
Right.
do what 5s do at their best, which is, I'm going to really focus and get this done.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go deeper.
Bring this together.
Yeah. And the depth part. So I think that with an average 7 behavior tends to be just touching the surface only. It's like, I know just enough to be dangerous, but if you kind of push a little further, sometimes the 7 in all of us isn't willing to stick with it, go
Right.
deep, really
Yeah.
touch what, and yeah.
Yeah, working with a 7. So they get all excited about this project and everybody gets all worked up, and then, you know, they're gone. It's like, what happened? What?
Yeah, exactly.
So you got to watch the 7 and keep them in the harness.
Yeah, except we know some brilliant 7s like Sean Huggins and Ross Hostetter, who are self-identified 7s who've written their books and
gotten things. Absolutely. No, it's
absolutely. So I think a really healthy 7 is able to go deeper and touch what's uncomfortable that they're constantly trying to distract themselves from with the remote controller or LSD or whatever it might be. The constant need to not feel what might just be a bit difficult in my life. And so I'm going to just distract myself and avoid it as much as possible. They fear missing out on a lot of good things. They're happy to miss out on things that they might identify as negative or uncomfortable or difficult. So, yeah, I think.
Yes, and just to add, if 7s indeed become sort of the best versions of themselves, they can really do a lot of good things. And I have a student in the Integral Flourishing course at the moment who is a business person who's just retired and who has spent his life helping other people to be the best business person that they can be. And he's sort of helped in, I think also in Sri Lanka, he's done projects, and in India and in Australia. And one of the interesting things for me is that I asked him what has been the best way that he managed to cope with being a 7 and sort of being distracted. And he said meditation, that he sort of cultivated that ability to focus, and that, so he's been in a marriage for a long time. So one of the things you can see with 7s is that they look for diversity in partners and sort of spend their lives as serial monogamists. But what this person did was sort of find a person he enjoyed being with, and then instead of looking for diversity via other people, looked for diversity in how can you make each moment of the relationship a joyous moment. And that's a sort of a turning around of what can be the pitfall of the 7 and making it into a strength. And one of the things that helped him do that, he said, was meditation.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I'd like to just end 7 by reminding ourselves of how we started the discussion of the Enneagram types. We started with 8 because I actually really like how Russ Hudson and the Enneagram Institute teachers tend to do that. They always start with type 8 because they're the most active, they're the go-getters, they kind of start, they're the initiators. So the discussion of Enneagram types, they like to start with 8. But the funny thing is then in a room full of these, sometimes it's an Enneagram retreat that's maybe taking several days to go through each type. And the one type that is the least patient and the one who wants to like get, spontaneously party on, is the one who has to wait till the very end to have their type be described, type 7. So it's a big practice for them to have to wait and like listen to all these other types and then we come to type 7.
Oh, so that's torture for a 7.
Right.
That's cruel.
I know, but then they see, well, look at me, I managed to wait somehow. Happily engaging in everything else. But yeah, here's the life of the party, and they're seductive, funny, joyous people who are for someone like me, a type 4, I love them because they pull me out of my misery and my like depth and all that. So or seemingly desire for depth, even though I probably don't get there often.
Oh no.
So really good. So here we are at the conversation of types. I think one other, just to wrap up on the conversation of types, I'd like to just remind a little bit about the quadrants, just kind of coming full circle. We started with talking about quadrants, and there is a beautiful typology to the quadrants as well. Some of us are more upper right, internal, individually oriented, and that can be seen as a typology. Some of us are maybe really good at taking really good care of their body, their sense of being in the world from an upper right space, good or not, but they're very behavior based somehow out in the world. And then some of us are very lower right systems oriented. We're kind of ones who are making all the patterns. I think of like Amina Nolan, for example, of the matrix leadership work, and she's very much about connecting the dots and these kind of the matrices of the world, very systems oriented. And then some of us are really lower left community oriented, almost to the point of some people not having much of a sense of an individual being and always very merged with others in a certain way. So the quadrants as a typology, I learned about it from the Integral Coaching Canada program. I think they might have been certainly some of the first people to speak about it more. Our quadrant orientation is a typology as well. I don't know if any one of you want to say anything about that before we close.
Well, I would just say that it's, I think we said this at the beginning of talking about types, is there are many different typologies and many different ways of looking at, just sort of slicing and dicing the energetics of all of humanity and how they show up in each of us. And there's astrology, and there's Myers-Briggs, and there's the Enneagram, which we delved into, but yeah, quadrants work. And that it's funny that to me, it illustrates the sort of infinite depth of the human being and range that any of these typologies, when laid upon this cloud of humanity, brings on a new understanding. And I find power and benefit on all of them.
Yeah.
That I've looked at. There are many I haven't.
Yeah.
I agree. And I would also say that in closing, as with all of the elements of the integral model, of course, that it's good to sort of hold it tightly when it's useful, but also to let it go quickly if it's a hindrance in relating to yourself or to other people. So just to sort of see that, of course, as we always need to be aware of, that the map is not the territory, and that that even though these typologies can really help us to understand ourselves and others better, and to therefore relate better to others, that they're maps and theories that are not reality itself, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So types, we can end here as the final element that we talked about. We've talked about quadrants, the 4 quadrants. We've talked about intelligences or levels of lines of development. We've talked about stages of development or structure stages of development. We talked about states, and we talked a little bit about state stages as well. And then finally the types. So, sir, I think in closing, Jeff, I'd love to hear from you how you really finally sort of eventually think about integral as a map, as a toolkit that we can use. Why do you continue to be inspired by that? And how do you kind of really try to bring it into your practical realm?
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit like what we've just been talking about. It is, yes, indeed, a map. It's a map of what it is to be human. But like all maps, the idea is not to hang at the map, but to find the territory. And so that's what integral helps us to do in ways that are just better than anything else I found, for the simple reason that it consciously attempts to include everything. So it includes right and left. It includes ancient, modern, postmodern. It includes the interiors, the world inside of each of us, as well as the exteriors, east and west. So anything that we science, religion, it's a way of integrating all of what we know. And we're at that stage of history where that is, first of all, possible. And it's been possible for, masses of people for maybe 100 years, the invention of mass communications, but literally more now exponentially than ever, so that we can sit at the feet of masters of all disciplines, whether they're alive or dead. 100 years ago, you couldn't do that. And we can see the manifestations of what it is to be human and all of these particularities that, Integral helps us to embrace the whole thing. So I love it for that. As a 5, I have to have that. I'm not satisfied with anything that's going to leave anything out. That's going to be a pain point for me. And then so we have everything. And then as we seek to include this, and it's a practice, that we start to see these patterns. And, Ken Wilber's optical map is just, I think, the most brilliant map of these patterns that are available to us. And it shows how, first of all, it shows that the whole system itself is evolving. And it's evolving from the Big Bang and possibly before. What was before the Big Bang is one of the great koans, modern koans. But it's evolving from the Big Bang for sure, as much as we can know these sorts of things. And what we see is that the Big Bang evolved 4 quadrants. And those 4 quadrants have been evolving ever since. So that we have the emergence of consciousness. And at the 4 quadrants, we divide the self into 2. Myself is my interior Jeff and my exterior body. So we'll just put those together and call that first person. And then second person is how I relate to other people and other, beings. And then third person is the stuff, the manifest itself. So all of those came online at the Big Bang, and that's important, because that's different than the great chain of being, where it was first matter and then thought and then consciousness. Now it was matter, thought, and consciousness and relationship from the first moment with atoms, or subatomic particles. And then, so how do you go from that to an apple martini? Or this conversation, or the works of Shakespeare? Well, here's how. You leave all that alone for 13.8 billion years. Don't touch it, don't bother with it. And you end up with this. So there's something going on. There's an updraft of development, of complexity, that as an integral practitioner, I actually want to feel that in my body, and in my energy body, and in my consciousness, and in my relationships. And I could see that these quadrants, or this first, second, and third person, it's not like, typically, Namali, you talked about the quadrants being sort of a typology too. And if to the degree it is true, I'm an upper left guy. Individual consciousness, I like to think about things. And so I can tend to think about my second person relationship, which is really first person thinking about second person. I can think about the world. And what Integral has called me to do, and it calls us all to do this, is to see that no, actually my second person, my relationships with other people is a dimension of reality. It's not reducible to my first person. That alone, let's pause there. It just gives us a chance to look at my relationships with a whole new light. They're their own thing. They actually have a lineage that goes back to the Big Bang too. And wow, and they're continuing to emerge. And with third person, my enmeshment and interpenetration with the manifest universe is not just something I'm thinking about. It's arising outside, and alongside, and it's, what do we say, tetra arising. All four of these quadrants are arising at the same time, interpenetrated with each other. And that's something we can feel. And so I love that. It really re-enchants the world, which is needed after modernity, which disenchants the world. We move from that world where God is everywhere to God is nowhere. And, so these are the stages, and we have talked about them in detail, and I encourage people to go back. But, basically we're talking about archaic and traditional, modern, postmodern, integral. These are the big stages that humanity is going through. And each one of them is radically different from the other. It's so funny. And it's fun to feel. And it's something that we can see also in our individual evolution. So I'm born and then I'm in my little egocentric where I don't care if mommy's upset because I'm crying. What I want, it doesn't even occur to me that I'm upsetting somebody. And then I move into, my family centric and community centric and nation and world. If you continue, some people get arrested at any of those stages. And a lot of it is a result of life conditions and just how much are you able to grow. And then you move into a cosmocentric, and that cosmocentric is actually the world of integral, because we're not only seeing the planet, but we're seeing the systems, the interior systems, the systems of thought and consciousness and all of the stuff I'm explaining. And this is a cosmocentric view that is just so much bigger and better. And so when you see this thing evolving, one of the tragic realizations that you have to deal with is that evolution, even if you think of evolution in the fields, with animals, it's beautiful in that it creates the most beautiful beings imaginable. I mean, let's just think about the living natural world. Oh my God. But every accomplishment of evolution was achieved through death, misery, brutality, war, starvation, So there's this magnetic pull in the cosmos, apparently, to what we call goodness, truth, and beauty, okay? And those things are achieved through their opposites, through things that are ugly and false and bad. So, welcome to evolution in this mess of, I often call it the catastrophe of human history and the heartbreak of that. And WTF, I mean, being integral doesn't, the existential question that human beings have been struggling with since they first saw the reflection in the still pool is, who am I? What am I doing here? What is all this about? And because integral it includes everything we know as best we can. It's a practice. It's not something we get successful at. It's something we get better at. But as we do this, we see that there is this amazing updraft that we're riding, and that we can see that it's accelerating, actually, and we can see that culturally, in our times, it's accelerating faster than ever, to the point where, we can handle it. We're meant to. Apparently, this should be happening, but it's just like, what's next? And human beings have always been asking that. Normally, it's about the weather, or what animal might attack. But now it's about just these big. It's like humanity. We talk about the morphic field, this sort of inner collective consciousness that makes a flock of birds. Do you ever see these beautiful flocks of birds do their dance, or schools of fish? And there's some loosh, there's this liquid space between us that, again, is not something that I can observe. It's something that I am. And that just continues to morph. And, the practical benefits of integral is that you're friendlier to all of it, because you move, we talk about integral is the first stage of development in what we call the second tier. And the second tier, as opposed to the first tier, which is, the last, we talk about archaic and traditional and modern and postmodern. Those all have some story. First tier memes all have some interpretation of reality of this, we've gone wrong. We've disobeyed God. We have, we've been disrespectful to Gaia, whatever it is. This shouldn't be happening. We've driven it into the ditch. The apocalypse is coming. We must be punished. We must repent. And Claire Graves, one of the first researchers about integral, talked about that this is a fear stage. All first tier memes operate out of some fear. Something's wrong. Something needs to be fixed. This shouldn't be happening. It's awful that it is. I can't stand it. Somebody needs to be condemned. And maybe it's even me who needs to be condemned, but somebody does. And integral is this move out of that to what Claire Graves talked about. I often think of it as fear versus love, but I think he talked about it in terms of being and creativity. And you're not complaining anymore. It's not the complain, condemn, and criticize. That's the 3 C's of the first tier. I mean, I still do plenty of that because I'm neck deep in first tier, but I'm working on it. And in second tier, you just become friendlier to the whole thing because you realize apparently this should be happening. It's awful, but I can handle it. And maybe it's beautiful too. And I can see the beauty if I look a little deeper and see a bigger, slightly bigger picture. And that offers, I've never liked hope as the right word because hope seems to imply that you're hoping things sort of, the dice gets, you get the right numbers pop up in the dice. But it's more like a trust. And it's something actually that you told me, Namali, years ago that has stuck with me and it was really a big insight for me. And we were talking about religion back in the Boulder Integral days. And we were talking about trusting God. And you said, I don't trust God. I trust emergence itself. And I love that. And and then you said, and I'm also religious, but not spiritual, in the sense that, you welcome in all the art forms of religion, and, but that thing about, I trust emergence. So it's not so much hope, I trust. Is it going to be a nightmare? Yes, apparently for a while it is. I actually think at some point we wake up from that. I think individuals are waking up from that. And I think everybody gets to be who they are in the meantime. This wonderful line from Ken. And, it's like an 8-year-old is not a defective 12-year-old. A 12-year-old is not a defective 21-year-old. Everybody gets to be who they are. Every culture gets to be who they are. As an integralist, we take a sort of a posture of loving the whole thing, loving the whole mess. I sometimes think of it as being grandparently, as opposed to parents, where we're always like, what have I done wrong? I'm silly. Grandparents are like, they fight, okay? Just make sure they don't kill each other. Mm-hmm. And that's really one of the things we want to do as integralists. Let's make sure we don't kill each other here. But in the meantime, we're going to fight our way forward. We're going to fail our way forward. This is the way of history. And we become friendlier to that. We're not just complaining about it and saying that something went wrong here. No. And that's, thank you, Ken. Thank you for writing a book that when, 30 years ago, I walked into a bookstore and saw it laying on a table. I remember it was, it was featured on a table, and the title was Up from Eden. And I felt my life change in that moment, because I was a fallen Christian kid who had become an atheist. And then I got into Buddhism, and I was trying to figure it all out. I was kissing all the frogs I could find. As a 5, it was easy. But to see Up from Eden, okay, we haven't fallen from paradise. We're rising. We're actually rising out of the swamps. And literally. And so when we see that, all of a sudden the posture towards everything changes. It's like, I have friends who, they're good old Boulder liberals and they're atheists and all of that stuff, but still they have this fall from paradise story where anything new, the internet, anything new is, if your story is we're falling for paradise, then anything new is like more evidence of that, and so they're just some of the most conservative damn liberals I've ever met. But if you see that we're rising, and we're rising through as I said, the downside of goodness, truth, and beauty, things that are fighting and failing, then you just become, a little more accepting. I always love Trumpa's word friendly to that, where you're not aggressing on everything all the time. And so I think something like that is how it operationalizes itself in me and other people for whom I've seen it operationalize itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, wow, talk about an integral sermon.
Yeah, baby.
Yes. From the integral mountain. Amazing.
Yeah. Hey, I'd actually offer a poem if you want to end there, which is, I think, is one of the greatest summations or expressions of integral that I've ever heard. And it's by Walt Whitman, my favorite. This is a poem you've heard many times, Namali. We used to end some of our programs at the Integral Center with it, but it is an expression of integral consciousness. And again, that's sort of, there's a lesson right there, because people are spiking into integral at all stages of history, and that the rest of them may not be, but these geniuses do, and above, integral and beyond. But this is Walt Whitman, Song of the Open Road, and I've committed it to memory. We'll see if I still remember. So I'll give it a whirl here. Song of the Open Road, Walt Whitman. From this moment, I ordain myself loosed of limits and imaginary lines, going where I list, my own master, total and absolute. Yet, listening to others, considering well what they say, pausing, searching, receiving, contemplating, and then gently, but with undeniable strength, divesting myself of the holds that would hold me, I inhale great draughts of space. The north and the south are mine, and the east and the west are mine. I am larger, better than I thought. I did not know I held so much goodness. All seems beautiful to me. Henceforth, I ask not for good fortune. I am my own good fortune. Henceforth, I whisper no more, whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing. Strong and content, I travel the open road. Thank you, Walt. Yeah, written in the Civil War. I mean, it's unimaginable, during that era.
Wow, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining our little series.
Yeah.
We've been able to kind of go back to the roots of what attracted us all to this integral map. In many different ways, we have been able to bring it to our practical realities of living daily lives. Just gain a lot of insight and beauty and frustration too, sometimes, where the map just feels to limit me as well on occasion. And the realization that it's just one among many other tools is really helpful, but my God, it is a very, very good tool. and for some of us, certainly, at least for myself, I can say it is so far the best tool that I have found, and it comes in handy so much. So
I agree. And I would say that it helps us to create a shared vocabulary so we can speak about things that are so difficult to speak about otherwise, and that are so intimate and personal, because they relate to experiences of sort of self-transcendence. And the integral map just gives us a way to also speak about that, and at the same time, indeed, as Jeff, as you were saying, also speak about everything in the external world and everything basically that we can identify. Jeff, thank you for sharing your passion, your wisdom, your experience, and for just being who you are and being a voice for integral in the world, and thereby being a voice for what humanity can be in the best sense.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on. And it is so great to ponder, where are we going to be, you know, in 50 years, 100 years, 500 years? We don't know, but if the goodness, truth, and beauty magnetism continues and it's built into the cosmos, we're going to fail and we're going to fight our way forward. But I can't wait. You know, the sacred world to come is coming.
yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll come back to you, Jeff, when we have other things that we want to come and like that, and then we get to pick your brain on that.
Yeah,
And
my
your
pleasure. Anytime. Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jeff.
Bye,
Thanks,
folks.
Normani. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.